Welcome to Season 4 of the Paleo Post Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things human evolution, ancient art, and the stories that connect us all. I'm Seth Choggy, joined by my fantastic co-hosts Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Nash. This season, we're taking you on a journey across continents and millennia, from the mysteries of rock art to the exciting prospects of my upcoming move to Portugal. We'll be chatting with some incredible guests, diving deep into the art and culture of our ancestors, and exploring the cutting edge of paleoanthropology. So buckle up for this season full of discovery, fresh perspectives, and a few surprises along the way. Hit the subscribe button and join us as we uncover the secrets of our shared past and chart new paths for the future. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. This is the Paleo Post Podcast. Today, Genevieve and I are sitting down with Dr. Brian Villmoare, a paleoanthropologist who's quietly rewriting a chapter of our origin story. Over the last 2 decades, he's been co-director of Ledi-Geraru project in Ethiopia, a place where the fossil record suddenly flickered with unexpected life. In their recent Nature publication, Villmoare and his team revealed fossilized teeth showing the early Homo and an entirely unknown species of Australopithecus species. We're walking at the same dusty land in the Afar region nearly 2.6 million years ago. That discovery upends the neat single-line story of human evolution and reminds us that our tree has many unswept branches. Today, we'll lean into that tangled lineage. We'll ask how a handful of teeth can recast what we thought we knew, and how our intimate knowledge of evolutionary cousins might have been, and what this means for the story we tell ourselves about being human. Dr. Villmoare, how are you today?
Thanks. I appreciate you having me here.
Of course. We're very glad to have you.
So many questions. That's what I said. It's a great story. So interesting.
Absolutely. So why don't we just start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself and then the project that we're going to be mainly focusing on, which is, of course, about this recent Nature publication.
Sure. I am an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Since 2002, I've been on this project called the Ledi-Geraru project. The way it was developed was my advisor and one of his good colleagues, Kay Reed, decided that they needed to search for fossils in a relatively unsampled stretch of the fossil record. So for reasons related to erosion and deposition that we don't really understand, the fossil record is good before 3 million years and good after 2 million years. But there's this interval between 2 and 3 million years that is poorly preserved. And that happens to be the time when a lot of interesting things happened evolutionarily. So the appearance of our genus, the disappearance of Lucy's species, the appearance of this enigmatic genus Paranthropus, and then a few other species. And they all appeared during this time, but we don't, up until the discovery of this permit area, there was no good fossil record for that interval. So I started in 2002 actually as a grad student, and I went into the field with them 2002, 2004. In 2008, my advisor, who was one of the directors, Charlie Lockwood, was killed, and they asked me to take over in his stead. I had just received my PhD and just got my first job. This is in London. And then it took until 2012 to actually find an area that preserved that time interval. So we walked across a lot of ground. A lot of it produced no fossils whatsoever. A lot of it was overlapping too much with other sediments. So in other words, in the Lucy Australopithecus afarensis time frame, which we weren't really looking for because that's fairly well understood. So we were looking for something later between 2 and 3. And finally, it was, I guess, 2013 was the first productive fossil collecting field season in that interval. And so that's when we found, for example, the early Homo jaw at 2.8. And we've been working there as often as possible, contingent on grants and politics, COVID, things like that, from then until now.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, I think many of our listeners have heard of the Ledi-Geraru project in Ethiopia. It's produced quite a range of fascinating fossils and has filled in quite a few gaps in our history. So, Genevieve, you said you had a lot of questions. I'm going to hand this off to you to start.
Actually,
because...
so Brian, I'm a paleoanthropologist, so my interest is more late Pleistocene.
Sure.
But because I am interested in obviously how did we become us, and I went to a university which was multi-field, so I did quite a bit of bioanth along the way. I was even the lab instructor for the intro to bioanth. So, I can roughly tell my Paranthropus from my Australopithecine and all that kind of stuff. But okay, so the first question though actually just came to me as we were doing it, which was, how exciting was it the first time you found something? Like that was a quest. Like that was almost 10 years you were looking, right? And then
more than 10 years. And
you
it
found
was
something.
a huge
Was that
deal.
cool?
So
Yeah.
no,
Please tell me
2013
about
finding
it.
the mandible was
Yeah.
I mean,
like, did you know right off the bat? Like, when you looked at it, were you like, this is something different? Like, did you have one of those moments?
well, the first thing you do is you make sure it's human, right? So you don't want
Step one.
to jump the gun.
Yeah.
It was obviously human right away. Yeah, we knew it was different. But I am a cautious person by
As one
nature
should be.
with regard to that sort of thing. So you don't want to make a bunch of statements without being 100% sure, because then you have to retract them. So no, we took it in the lab, and it was fairly obvious that it was Homo, but you have to document all the reasons that it is, because people are going to challenge you. So as soon as you say you have
Especially
something
in
new,
this field, right?
right.
The
The first
blood
thing they're going
sport.
to say is, no, we don't believe you.
Yep.
So, and if you look, there was an initial article, and then the group that had discovered and described Sediba challenged our conclusions. So there was like a response in Science, and then we had a response to the
Positive
response.
response.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, we figured it was going to be a little bit of that. It
Yeah.
blew up a little bigger than we had anticipated, but that's
Well,
that's it.
I
That's
mean,
for
it's
the
our
good.
common origins, right?
Right,
So, I
right.
mean, I
Yeah,
think people get
right.
excited. So, what was it? So, I was going to say, because is this before this, like when I was a university student and then grad student, and again, half listening while paying more attention to paleo art, but still obviously paying somewhat attention. What was the oldest age of Homo habilis used to be younger? Like
Oh,
this
yeah.
is it,
No, right.
like
Yeah,
this
it's
has
much, much
gotten like, so
older.
Homo habilis is the first Homo, this is our family group, so to speak. Like if we had a family portrait, this would be kind of the grandpa
Right,
in there would be
right,
the Homo habilis, right?
right,
And it used to be more like around 2 million-ish,
right.
right? Like
Exactly.
two.
Yeah.
So what is the date now? That might be sort just in case we've
Two,
got paleo art people like me listening.
oh yeah, sure. 2.8.
Oh
So
wow.
so that
That's
pushes it
huge.
very close to the extinction, or the last known date, I
Yeah.
shouldn't say extinction, the last
Yeah.
known date of Lucy's species, which is Australopithecus afarensis. And we because it was so widespread, so that
Yeah.
particular species ranged minimally from northern Ethiopia all the way down to Tanzania, but possibly even further. It's a fairly generalized species, so it makes a reasonably good anatomical ancestor for later species. So we tend to think that uh, later species evolved from afarensis, or at least that's the sort of working hypothesis we're working on. So the
Okay.
disappearance of that is kind of a big deal, because in a sense that is really the root stock of later
Yep.
humanity, right? So
Okay.
the last known species is 2.95, and it's not
Okay.
too far away. So our permit area is actually up against their permit area. There's this dry riverbed called the
Ooh.
Order River. And if you go over, on the west side, you're in Hadar. On the east side is in our permit area. So we were close when we found this mandible. I think it might have been, I'm going to just guess, 7 miles or something,
Oh
into our
wow.
permit area. So,
Okay.
it was not unreasonable to find it there
Mhm.
after the disappearance of Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis.
So I'm just thinking, like, with more the era and the time periods that I tend to think about,
Hmm.
is it's almost reminds me of like Australopithecus. So this is Australopithecus, pardon me, afarensis. So this is Lucy,
Hmm.
right? This is
Right,
who we're
right,
talking about here.
exactly. Yeah.
So it reminds me a bit of how in the next stage down, we often think of Homo erectus as being again that broad
Yeah,
species from
right,
which potentially Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo
right.
sapien, maybe later, later erectus, for instance, even maybe like that. There's several. So it's that same sort of idea. So this is
Yeah,
Lucy's
it's
species
very
is the same
similar.
equivalent. Okay.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that there
Yeah.
are some species. So if you think about the way animals live on the environment, some animals are specialized.
Yeah.
So like uh, orangutans, they're always in danger because their habitat's being destroyed. So if you
Yeah.
tamper with that habitat, they're really good at living in the trees, in the rainforest, right?
Yeah.
But if you tamper with that, they just die. They can't survive in a more broken
Wow.
environment. But compare that to like the baboon. The baboon is ubiquitous across Africa. It's like the coyote of Africa. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You couldn't make coyotes or baboons extinct. Like they're just
Yeah.
too everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so some
Okay.
animals seem to be super adaptable that way, and Homo erectus certainly. But
Yeah.
Afarensis seems to have been pretty adaptable as well
That
for a long
seems right.
time, until the environment finally did change so much that it
Yeah.
just couldn't survive. And if you, I guess, I don't know if we're getting ahead of ourselves, but because at Ledi-Geraru it's later, so we
Mhm.
go from 2.8, 2.6, then we have some younger stuff as well. The environment is much drier than what you find with Lucy's species. So,
Okay.
like,
So environmental shift. I did
right.
have that
And
was one of my other questions was I
yeah,
was going to
yeah,
ask
right.
about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you're looking for hominins, at least my experience, is that you find a lot more animals than you find humans. So you might, I mean, it's like 1,000 to 1, something like some huge number, really. But those are super important because they tell you about what's going on around the hominins. So,
Yeah.
at Hadar, where Lucy was, you have forest-dwelling animals like colobus monkeys and bush dikers
Oh,
and dik-diks, right, in the fossil record.
okay.
When you get to Ledi-Geraru, you don't. And you have things like wildebeest, right, which are open country grazing animals. And you have
So savanna,
baboons.
grassland.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So,
Okay.
I mean, animals will normally, once they've stabilized into their niche, they won't change. And
Yeah.
Lucy had a good niche for 1 million or maybe 1,000,004, depending on your taxonomy. Um, but then the environment did change. We know that. And most animals, when they're faced with environmental change, go extinct. So if you go back through, like the fossil record all the way back, whatever it is, 99.99999% of all animals just have gone extinct, right?
Yeah.
And but some figure out a way to adapt. So in the case of of humans, when Lucy went extinct, there was a branch of Lucy that turned into Homo, and a branch
Mhm.
that turned into this other Australopithecus we have. Another branch turned into Paranthropus, which we
And
can
that's the
talk
one with
about.
the huge big crests. So,
Yeah,
okay,
right. So we
I
yeah,
have
they're
more,
super
but I'm totally
interesting.
monopolizing you. So I'm going to let Seth talk for a minute, but we'll pin it. I have more questions, but no, thank you. That was helping. Again, I was seeing that this was really helping reshape the whole story, kind of like Seth said at the top, was
Yeah, yeah,
that this is
it's
where,
important to give your viewers like that sort of background. Otherwise, it kind of makes no
yeah.
sense,
So that's what I'm here for, right? Because
Right,
otherwise, you guys are
right.
such specialists, you could just talk. So this is where I'm in and out at the same time. So it's perfect, and I'm learning, and I think it's fascinating too. So okay, Seth, I'll let you talk about. I'll let you do bioanth.
So, with Lucy being, as you mentioned, also considered the last Australopithecine species before the divergence into Homo, what does it mean now that there is a potential other Australopithecine species after Lucy that is not, I would assume, the ancestor of Homo?
No, no,
What does
it's
that mean?
probably as far as we know, it's the ancestor of nothing. I
Right.
mean, it is like a dead end, and there are lots of them. I
Hmm.
mean, there's only one human left alive, and we have
Yeah.
as many as 27 or 26 human species, depending
Hmm.
on, people argue taxonomy, but basically you
Right.
have, let's say 26, and at 2 million years, just that at that around 2 million years, you had something like 6 or 7 species, across Africa. So, yeah, you do have this like it's very speciose. So it did catch us by surprise because the model had been that something like Afarensis would go extinct, and you
Hmm.
wouldn't have anything that didn't have some adaptation that allowed it to survive in this drier country. So no question, it's a surprise. Like Paranthropus, that we alluded to before, and it's known from southern Ethiopia all the way down to Tanzania. It has really huge teeth
Hmm.
and the giant chewing muscles and this really strangely shaped face that was basically was chewing kind of something tough and probably chewing
Mhm.
it for a long period, maybe all day. And you think about like cows, cows basically chew all day. They're just constantly, and it's a low quality food, so it has to. Whereas like a carnivore can basically eat and then rest for days. So it's like, you have this adaptation that's dependent on the amount of resources that you consume and the quality of them. So Paranthropus was more toward the cow end of the spectrum. Homo was more toward the carnivore end of the spectrum because it was, had stone tools and it was eating meat. So, yeah, this Australopithecus was a surprise. Now, when you look at the anatomy, of course, we only have the teeth, but it does have large teeth. It's among the largest of the Australopithecus afarensis teeth. So you could argue that it was trying to do something similar to Paranthropus, like it might have had big chewing muscles, but we don't have the rest of the skull, so it's actually kind of hard for us to know. But yeah, no, it was a surprise. But then, of course, it did go extinct. So it's not like,
Mhm.
Paranthropus survived for well over 1 million years in various species, in South Africa and East Africa. Whereas this, as far as we know, we only have this species as late as, as we have it, 2.6. That's not, it might have lasted 300,000 years in some small niche in the Ledi-Geraru and then gone extinct. We don't know of it anywhere else, that's for sure.
Mhm. Um,
Absolutely.
sorry, can I just jump in about Paranthropus just while we're on it? Okay. Um, so it's we don't normally see the same species appear spontaneously on opposite sides of the world, like, or I guess a genus, necessarily. So I guess the question I have is that Paranthropus ends up in South Africa as well. Is that right? If
Yes,
I
that's
remember
right. Yeah.
correctly. Okay, so I'm remembering Gold Star, I'm remembering my bio. Um, where did it come from? Did it come from Ethiopia then? Is that the belief, or is it thought that because it's such a specialized species? Do you know what I mean? Like in the sense that that is a very odd set of characteristics it developed, and it seems unlikely from the outside looking in, anyways, that you would have two of these cow-like species of like from the range who develop the big sagittal crests and get the big teeth and sit around sort of chewing all day to appear on opposite ends of Africa with no connection or movement between them. Like, so is it thought that, and again, it's okay if you don't know I was just curious, like, is it thought that there's one point somewhere somebody started growing a bit of a crest and eating food like that, and then obviously they specialized and genetic drift happened and they started to become the Paranthropus as its own thing? But did that happen once, or did it happen from different Australopithecines in different parts of Africa?
So this has
Like,
been a debate in the discipline.
oh, okay, there we
Yeah, so
go.
this is like a thing that people argue about, and I am one of the
Okay.
people that argues it.
Oh,
So
goody. Tell us more.
yeah, well, I've published a couple articles where I've
Okay.
looked at the anatomy to see if essentially the probabilities or the underlying uh, quantitative genetics of the face to see what the likelihood is that you would have this happen two times independently.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yeah, and there is people have argued that the South African Australopithecus, which is an Australopithecus africanus, makes a good ancestor. And they had identified one or two traits that seem to be uniquely shared with the southern variant of Paranthropus, which is known as robustus, and this southern African Australopithecus. So for example, got CT scans of all of those and looked to see if they were the same on the inside, and they're not.
Oh,
So they're just kind of externally similar. So they just were literally like a red herring. Um,
okay.
and so my position is that they are a genus. In other words, they share a common ancestor. And we do have a good
Okay.
candidate for the common ancestor. It's called Australopithecus or Paranthropus ethiopicus, and it's older than either Robustus or Boisei, which are the two most well-known species. It's really only
Okay.
known from one skull, um, but it does make a good intermediate. In other words, it has more
Like it's
primitive
partway
traits.
towards, but
Yeah,
not quite as
exactly.
extreme as it got, kind of thing.
Right,
Where
right.
is that one found?
Kenya. That's from
Okay. So
around Lake Turkana. So like,
okay.
east and west side of Lake Turkana, all this stuff has been discovered.
So
And it's in the very northern
Ethiopia.
edge. Yeah, it's at the
Okay.
border between Ethiopia and Kenya.
Okay. Okay. So it's kind of, so it's on the East African side, and then it's thought that over time some of them shifted down into the south. Is
Sure.
that
If
kind
you
of
have a
the idea?
successful adaptation,
Yeah,
then
you
animals will
would
migrate.
follow the environments. Yeah, that
Right.
moved
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
you. Okay.
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because that's what
Yeah.
I mean.
No. Right.
It's such an interesting time period, and there's
No.
so
And when
much.
we found the teeth, like before I had even had a
Yeah.
chance to look at them, they said we have some teeth, and I was thinking, oh man, I hope it's Paranthropus. Like I would love to find the earliest Paranthropus for sure, but it's not.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
you
Future seasons.
well, it could be that Paranthropus wasn't up there. In other words, you do have this idea. You have a lot of species of Australopithecus running around Ethiopia around this time because you also have Garhi, which all does have large teeth. So multiple times in this drier environment, nature was experimenting with different ways to try to get humans to survive, to make their teeth bigger, And so our species is one, Garhi is another, Paranthropus is another. Like that. This is like apparently an adaptation that works, I would say.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Sorry, Seth. I keep interrupting. I'll let you go again. Thank you, though. That's great, Ryan.
So two things came to mind from based on what you were talking about. One is you mentioned that Homo had tools and was eating meat, and that of course made me think of sites like Lomekwi, where
Right.
we're potentially thinking maybe Australopithecines had stone tools.
Right.
Does any dental morphology in Australopithecus records show that they could have been eating meat? Or is that
No. Our teeth are terribly adapted for eating meat. If you look at the teeth of a carnivore, like a canid or a felid, cats or dogs, they're super sharp. I mean, they are literally blades. They're called carnassial teeth, and they sit back. They're basically the molars back there, and they slice right through meat. Humans have big flat grinding teeth. So the only way we can eat meat is if we pre-process it. I don't know if you've ever tried. I haven't experimented. Like I went to the butcher and I said, give me a piece of meat. I'm just going to eat it. So he cut it from the middle, so it was, like equivalent to steak tartare, but unprocessed. And it's impossible. Like you would just gnaw on that thing and it gets mashy and pulpy. And so I sliced it with a knife into thin pieces, and then you can eat it, right? So, but it's not. We are poorly adapted anatomically to eating meat. So you're dependent on tools, and that's part of the critical adaptation for Homo for sure. And with Lomekwi, we don't know what the tools were for, and chimps do use tools. In other words, they will crack nuts and they will fish for termites. So I wouldn't say that we should be surprised that Australopithecus was using tools. I mean, they had bigger brains than chimps, right? So they should be, somewhat more advanced in terms of problem solving than chimps. But since we don't know what it's for, until we find something else in the fossil record, it becomes kind of speculative.
Absolutely.
They're not like sharp flakes. The way if you look at the earliest Homo tools, those are clearly cutting tools. Like, they are super sharp. And you can, there are a lot of types of silica stone that you can just literally tap and you will have something as, literally as sharp as surgical steel after one whack. Like that is a meat cutting thing. And it's not very good for anything else. Like it's not a sturdy blade. You can't cut nuts with it. It'll just disintegrate. But it is super sharp. So, at least in those cases, it's pretty clear what it's for. Plus, they're cut mark bone and all this kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. And then, so moving on a little bit. So you found these teeth. You have established that it's potentially a new species. It likely is. Why is there no name yet?
Well, we just don't know that much about it. We just sort of felt that until we can characterize the species a little bit more, let's just hold back. There's no need to name the new species. We didn't name the species of Homo we found either.
Right. That was coming up. Yeah.
We are as a group, I think, careful. Like we don't. This is sort of inside baseball, but naming a species is a very political thing,
Absolutely.
because in the olden days, Yeah, in the olden days, people would name it after people they admired, or in one case,
Hmm.
Australopithecus boisei is literally named after the sponsor of the group. It would be like if someone was giving you money for the field season, and you would call it, Australopithecus Nike,
Yeah.
or Adidas or something, Adidas. So no, and recently you sort of incorporate the local culture into it, and then what does the word mean? Um, so but none of that is science. That's all politics. And
Mhm.
so I personally have zero interest in that. Like, I just don't like, I mean, if we find something um, more complete, we will be compelled to name a species, and then it will be complicated, and people will criticize you for whatever you name it. And it's, I don't know. But none of us have any urge to do it. You will see people still today who find something, they're tripping over themselves to, give it a name that they think is
Absolutely.
clever or whatever, or relevant to something. I just as soon leave it to someone else, to be honest. I mean, yeah, it doesn't interest me at all.
That makes perfect sense. I really like how this team is putting the science before anything else and keeping the facts straight and not just, I don't know, adding some
Mhm.
fluff as other teams might do that we won't mention. But
Yeah, no, I mean, so as a group, we're, I mean, there is no sort of big ego leading this group,
mhm,
so,
Best way.
yeah, and it has made things a lot, easier for us. And we're very science forward. So as soon as we have described this, it is now available to the rest of the scientific community. In other words, we are not going to impose conditions on people who look at it. And that is, and, just like if you want to look at our jaw or our teeth, uh, you can, right? Our policy is like open door. And that is not the case with a lot of groups that find fossils. In other words, if you, in most cases, if you find it, you have the right to do the initial description. That's kind of the deal, right?
Mhm.
But then in other, some people want to then hold on to it and prevent other people from looking at it.
right.
And that's not just in Africa, that's elsewhere.
Mhm.
Because they feel proprietary about it, and perhaps they don't want you to contradict what their analysis of the material was. There are a whole bunch of reasons related to human ego,
Mhm,
and we are trying to steer, the ship in the other direction. So, yeah, anyone that wants to look at our stuff, no problem. Take your own pictures, take your measurements, have at it,
Mhm.
We have no more claim to it, really. Like, it's the property of the Ethiopian people, right? We find it, we get a chance to describe it, it goes into the National Museum. And then at that point, it's the property of the museum. And even when we want to see it, we have to ask the museum for permission to come and look at it. Now they grant it; it's not a thing. We all kind of know the people, and but yeah, there is a whole lot of politics around that is pretty unpleasant, and has been unpleasant
mhm,
for quite a while. So
Yeah.
we're
So
trying
no,
to
I mean,
not do that.
I like to think I like what your team's doing. I mean, it's sort of like with my team as well, where it's sort of the policy is best idea wins.
Yeah,
Like
right,
it doesn't really
right.
matter where it comes from. Like I want things to be as accurate as possible. I want us to be again like collaborating in if you hold things back and you're missing ideas as well, you're missing perspectives and experience and so no, I love what your team is doing. I think it's the future. I
I
think
hope it is. I
honestly,
mean,
I think the ones who do it differently are going to become fossils.
well, I mean, you hope that's the case.
Yeah,
It is the case that dinosaurs and humans, right? If you make a big
yeah,
discovery, the possibility is
yeah,
that you will acquire some degree of fame, right?
yeah.
And that means it attracts a certain type of personality a certain percentage of the time. And those
Yeah.
people, the stories about them. It's this way in dinosaurs, maybe even worse in dinosaurs. I actually
I
think,
have
mhm.
heard that. Yes,
yeah, like I mean,
paleontology there is even that far back.
yeah, yeah. And I have some hairy stories that I have heard, and I mean, so you know, but we're aware of that, and we just try to say we're going to set a standard that is
Yep,
the opposite, and just hope other people follow. We'll
I
see,
love it.
you know.
That's awesome. No, it's the way to be. That's why it's lovely to have
So,
you on the show talking about it.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
and like our group, if you tried to be that way, you would probably be out of the group. Like,
yeah,
in other words, like the philosophy of the group is, don't be that person.
Don't be
Right.
that person. That's
Right.
awesome. May I ask a question? So if Homo habilis is what we think of with the fossil record around 2 million, which is kind of, again, what I understood before we talked about this, do you still think this is Homo habilis then? Or is this, you're
No, we
not even
never.
saying that?
No,
At
we
this point,
never
you're
said.
just using the word Homo loosely
Right. So
and
there's
recognizing that it's related and it's definitely part of that genus. So it's part of that family group because of the teeth matching more with what the Homo habilis teeth look like.
and the
So
shape
you're
of the
looking at
jaw, right?
the
Yeah.
shape of the jaw.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you took, our mandible, our early Homo mandible, and you held it next to Homo erectus, I mean,
Yeah.
you would say, yeah, that looks a lot more like Homo erectus than it looks like Afarensis, or any
Yeah,
other
because they have that
Australopithecus.
distinctive shape, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
like if you look at ape jaws, they're deep in the front and they taper back shallowly. And you see
okay.
that in Australopithecus as well. So they have apey jaws, right? When you
Okay.
get to
Okay.
Homo, it's fairly consistent, right?
Yep.
And that probably
Okay.
speaks to some sort of reduction in bone. In other words, like at least at the, that it doesn't need this huge buttressing in the front. That's what we
Yep.
think, but that's just speculation. But anyway, yeah. But the anatomy is clear. And then the teeth are shaped like Homo teeth and so forth. So
Okay.
there are a bunch of things in it. But all we're saying is that,
Yep.
there is
This is the branch.
Australopithecus, and then we are probably somewhere down here at the base of that branch. That's all we're saying. We're not, like
Yeah.
not trying to
Okay.
get
So
too
that's
far
all
out.
you've said is just it's from the genus Homo.
Right. Now there are
These are
other.
for X, Y, and Z since I'm Canadian. These
Yeah.
reasons. This is why this is why we're placing it into this family group loosely, but we're not naming it or specifically sort of trying to say it is or is not this thing. But if
Species are tricky with that because
it's not like one day they woke up and there was a memo and it's a new species. Like that's the thing. It's a very gradual shift over time, and it's more like certainly with Homo sapien. I know we think of it as more like there's a convergence of characteristics, and it's like once you kind of get to that point, okay, we could consider this to be a new species, but obviously, yeah, it's not like a Homo erectus had a Homo sapien baby one day. Yeah.
There's a period, I mean, with any evolutionary divergence where, of course, they look the same, right? Because they just,
course.
And, the way we think of it is that you have genetic discontinuity. In other words, there's no breeding between the two. But initially, that'll probably be because of some geological distance, not because the anatomy is incompatible. And then at some point along there, incompatibilities are acquired, and then they can no longer. Then they are
too
different
far apart.
species. Yeah, right. So yeah, you would expect Homo down here to look a lot like Afarensis, and in some ways it does, right? So the problem is that our taxonomy is great for dealing with things in one time slice. So you can say Homo sapiens, Pan troglodytes are chimps, gorillas, etc., right? But when you incorporate time, there's, because you can, like with Homo erectus is the classic example. Early Homo erectus looks quite different from late Homo erectus. And some people have argued that they should be called a different species. So, ergaster or whatever. Because there's no, like the concept of genetic discontinuity doesn't really work when you factor time in, right? Because the early group and the later group, could they have interbred? How would you know? Even if they share, a continual genetic heritage all the way through over 1 million years, with Homo erectus, right? Or more than 1 million years with Homo erectus, right? Because like you have later Homo erectus in Jiquitian with cranial capacity that overlaps with modern humans. Like it's over 1,200 cc's, and the early it's like 800. And so if you found those next to each other, you might say they might be a different species, but you do have this continual fossil record with Homo erectus, and there's no disjunct in there anywhere, right? So we call them Homo erectus. At least I do. I have also waded into that debate a little bit.
Yes, there is that one too. Yeah, there's also like Redensiensis or Redensis, or there was another one. Wasn't there another version as well? I feel like there were several.
That's what they call Heidelbergensis.
That's the other one of that. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
That's the cowboy skull, that's a gigantic cowboy skull. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
So
Seth,
I would like to ask, I know of a few individuals who will go unnamed, but who have always caused quite a stir in paleoanthropology and have for the last 50 years. I don't know. So you didn't name it, but you decided there's a new species based on teeth that you discovered. And there are some individuals who would argue that that's not enough to name a new species. What would you say to those individuals, and why are these teeth and their differences in morphology enough to name a new species?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was if you look at the paper, we're extremely careful and we discuss four potential hypotheses for these teeth, right? So one of them is that this is simply afarensis that has persisted. And another one is that it's ancestral to Paranthropus. We don't think it is. It's not Garhi. It looks very unlike Garhi. So we are pretty careful about and so we provisionally say this is a new species because the teeth, if you take those teeth, they can't fit into, excuse me, they can't fit into the pattern of variation that we see in afarensis. So afarensis is an extremely well characterized species because we have hundreds of fossils of them. So we have hundreds of specimens of afarensis. So that the whole range of variation. We have adults, kids, males, females. Heavily worn. Not heavily worn. And you can look at all of those teeth, and the teeth we have won't fit in anywhere in those. So they fall outside the range of variation. So that's normally the standard for, deciding something is a new species if you can't fit it in anywhere. And, I mean, in terms of the metrics, if you just go off the numbers, like it falls at the very upper edge of afarensis. But then it has some other features that are what you call non-metric, which is just some contours and shapes that we don't quantify, that just you don't see in afarensis anywhere. And the canine is very different. And I'm just talking about the molars. If you look at the canine, the canine is also very different. So, we have upper teeth and lower teeth, and you can't fit them in afarensis. Now, you could argue that that's just afarensis evolving in a lineage and being different. But since you've already had speciation with Homo, I mean, that is essentially what it means to be a new species.
A new species.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were well aware that you would see an argument like this, but there's no place else to go with it. The teeth just said what they said.
And if you're familiar at all with Dr. Ryan McRae's PhD, he worked with Brianna Povener. He did basically a survey of all the fossils that have been found in Africa and the proportions of what were teeth, what were lower limbs, and basically the fossil record was. And of course, dentition makes up most of the fossil record from Africa and probably the world in general. So I would assume it's pretty fair that, as you mentioned, if those teeth don't fit anywhere, probably something different. So I would say I agree that's a pretty safe assumption at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we tortured the whole argument just to make sure that we were not getting ahead of our, out in front of our skis. Because, you don't want to do that, in a publication like Nature, end up looking like a fool, right? So, that's why if you read the section on the phylogenetic hypotheses, we were very careful about the way we phrased that. We said provisionally we argue this is a new species. If something happens that, contradicts it, we're certainly happy to, accept it if it's the most reasonable hypothesis.
So what's next for Ledi-Geraru? I assume you're continuing the search for new fossils?
Yeah, and we do have new fossils. It's just it takes time to describe them. So we have some stuff that's fragmentary, and you have to go back year after year and work your way down the hill screening. It's a pretty arduous process. So we do have new stuff, and it will come out in the next few years, once we have a chance to find as much as we can find, and then you make comparative analyses. You have to go to other museums oftentimes, and try to figure out where it sits in things. I mean, we're continuing. We're going to go this year. By some miracle, our NSF grant came through again this year.
Hey, congratulations.
Wow. Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So we had a 2-year grant, and we got the first year to go this past February, and we just assumed that the second year money was not coming, but we just got notified that the NSF money was coming through. So we will go this year. And we do have some European funding that will allow us to continue out over the next probably 5 years. So we just go back and keep looking. And there's a whole section. So we have like 2.8, 2.6, 2.4, but that time period between 2.8 and 2.95 or 3, when Afarensis disappears, that's a super interesting time. So we're now, we have a pretty big permit area, and we've been working in sort of the east side. And so now we're going to maybe focus on the west side where it's closer to Hadar, to Lucy era sediments, and hope to catch that little interval when things are going extinct and also first appearing, because that's now, a pretty interesting window. Since we know we have Homo by 2.8, what happened before 2.8, right? So you want to, push it back as far as you can. So that's what we're, going to be working on next, probably. It's, the fieldwork's a big logistical thing. So you have to make a shift and the camp has to move and all this kind of thing. But there are fossils out there. So, and, we walked for, like I said, 10 years finding very little. So, we may spend another year just like walking the earth and not finding very much, like that's the prospect for new territory,
Yeah, it's so fun though, because I've done it with like relic fields, like with lithics, like in the Middle East and stuff, like where again the conditions are great for it to be on the desert floor. And it is the first relic field that I was ever part of finding was like the best. It was like Christmas and like Hanukkah, like every holiday wrapped up into one. It was so exciting that I was like, oh, what have we found? Like it was so cool. So I mean, I think that's what's so important for viewers to understand is, I think that's what keeps us going back, is that it's the possibility of discovery, I think, is one thing. And then just for viewers who may not be as familiar with the bioant side of things, fossils from this long ago are really, really, really hard to find because they are mostly probably very far below ground level, which means you need these unusual settings. Tell me a little bit more. What is it about the setting of your sites? Like is this like, I think with the Rift Valley, people kind of understand that it's cracked open, and so as you walk downwards, you're actually walking back in time in this very unusual setting, which allows us to get down to millions of years ago. Because normally with the way things build up, there could be things in other parts of the world, but we wouldn't know because it's buried under vegetation and forests and layers of dirt and all these, like, to even get down to that point, like it's extraordinary when things get found. And so now you're talking about more fossils, but like this is why it took so long for you to find the right spot, is that it's really difficult. So tell me more about what does this look like? And these tuffs are to do with volcanic stuff, right? Like that's what that is, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it looks like not dissimilar from Arizona, not as high vertically, but you have like these eroded sections, and rivers cut through. So we have a couple of rivers, and they, over time they have shifted or gotten wider and narrower, and so they leave these exposed sediments, and over time, erosion, like annual rainfall, allows material to sort of tumble out, and you hope to catch, where the stuff is tumbling out. So you see it on the surface, like with the teeth. They were discovered, actually. I wasn't there for the initial discovery, so we kind of stagger because it takes place during the school year, when we're supposed to be teaching. And like one group comes in and does, say, 3 weeks or a month, and then someone else comes in and does the second half of the season, like the second month. And so I got there just a couple days after they found it, and they showed me where they had found the teeth, and then I screened that whole area, set up a grid, and did the whole thing. And then we found more teeth, right? So that's kind of the way it works, right? You find something and then you screen, but you can't know. Something could be 1 inch under the dirt, and you just would never know. And people always ask me, could you do ground penetrating radar? And the answer is no, just because most of the fossils just look like rocks, and they are, the same density as rocks. So there's no, but anyway, so it just looks kind of like Arizona, a little bit lower in terms of topography, but that's the idea. Dry, like there is in most of it, there is nothing living, only down by like the very close to where the dry creek bed kind of cuts through. Do you see a few bushes or trees? But otherwise it's, and that's perfect.
That's
because
what you want. That's how you get down to the good stuff, because otherwise it's covered with like
yeah,
ground sort of
foliage, right?
vegetation
Yeah.
and
So
other
like
things. Yeah.
there are probably fossils all throughout the
See?
Congo, and
Right?
will never know because
Oh,
it's underneath the rainforest, you know?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's what it looks like, and
Yeah.
then you go
Okay.
in and you excavate. And
But
I
you do get a
like
spidey sense. Like I've gotten now where I'm sort of like, again, if I'm in certain parts of the Middle East and stuff, where I'm like, I bet you we should look over there. Like you start to kind of get. I
well, it's
feel
where
like
the erosion is good. Like so
you're
there's some
knowing. You
good
start to
right,
know. Yeah.
right. Although plenty of times we said, I bet there are fossils out there, and you go out there and you're like, shit. You know, like I
There's
mean, like
nothing.
we strike out way more than we
Of
hit.
course. I
Um,
know. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I to be honest,
It's still
one
a
of the
good day
reasons
in the field,
yeah,
honestly.
no,
I think.
one of the reasons
Yeah.
I like this career is because it combines intellectual work with
Yeah.
being in the out of doors. I was always a backpacker and a climber as a kid, and so this allows
Perfect.
me to sleep in a tent, you know, be out of doors, walk
Yeah.
across the desert, which I love to do anyway. I mean, I live in Nevada and I'm a hiker here, so
Amazing.
you know, it combines those interests, and so no,
Yep.
I don't mind. I mean, for me, just
No,
being in the
that's what I
field
was
is
saying. No, yeah,
pleasure.
it's exciting when you have those amazing days, or like when you do. But every day you're like, it's yeah. I've had days where I'm like, I can't believe this is my job. Where you
Right.
just it's so fantastic. That's amazing. If we're not too pressed for time, is it okay if I ask one more question,
No, no,
Seth? Will
you
be
take your
okay?
time.
You're good, okay, Ryan? Okay,
There's nowhere I have to be.
okay,
Today is Labor
all
Day,
right.
so
That's what I mean. I was gonna say I wasn't joking when I said I had questions. The other thing I was thinking about was the timing of sort of when you're finding these interesting shifts. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the last set of ice ages started around 2.5 million years ago. Am I right? Like, was it around like I'm because of course I know the European. I'm sort of thinking more in that sense, but I believe it was around 2.5 to 3 million was when the glacial cycles started. I mean, obviously, there's deeper geological time, and I was wondering if, because you mentioned that Lucy and her family members were more like potentially living in mixed forest, and so
right.
suddenly we seem to be on the savanna. So we're talking about an environmental shift, and certainly with the later stuff as well, we're very aware of how important environmental shifts are when it comes to where can people move to, where do they get stuck, how does that impact local extinction events or groups getting split off from each other. So I was wondering as well if with this sort of speciation you see taking place there, do you think it might be that some environmental conditions change, kind of like the greening of the Sahara versus it turning back to a desert and being like a hard block? Like maybe was there
Oh
something
no,
going on in that
for sure
area?
that's what happened. That's
Okay.
why and there's
Aha.
a famous argument called the turnover pulse hypothesis, and
Okay.
that you
Yeah.
see in East Africa generally a change in the fauna. So
Okay.
and you see animals that are more adapted to open country. You know, so you know, grazing and browsing animals are two different things. Browsers eat leaves, so like bush dikers and dik-diks and things like that.
Okay.
Grazers are like wildebeest, zebras, you know, and so their dentition is very distinct. And so you can
Yes.
tell very clearly a grazer from a browser because grazers, you know, you think of like horse teeth kind of grow their whole lives because they're basically chewing silica,
And
all
so
the
it's constantly
grass.
grinding their teeth down.
Yeah, the grass is
Oh,
silica heavy, and so it
okay.
requires really strong teeth to process that material. Whereas leaves are very soft, and so the teeth there, like if you look at a deer in the United States, they have
Mhm.
they're browsers. They eat leaves off of trees, and so
Yeah.
their teeth are not particularly sturdy. They're just like cusped, kind of like ours are, and they break down
Yeah.
those soft leaves. But yeah, if you look at a horse or something like that, anything that's grazing,
Yeah.
bison would be the American equivalent, and they
Okay.
have really like big grinders, you know, that grow for a long time. So,
So what about Paranthropus? Are they browsers or grazers? Now that we've got
well,
the
so
term,
I mean, we don't. I mean,
what's
people
going?
argue
Or do
this
we
as
not know? I'm
well.
just asking
No,
based on their
no.
teeth.
Based on the teeth, you can't tell. I will say this: like, they're not eating grass. Like the
No.
humans don't have the digestive system for that.
Mhm.
No.
They could be eating like tubers or something under the ground.
Okay.
If you look at the way their teeth, first of all, they're huge, right? So they have big surface area, but also they wear really quickly. So one of the most
Oh.
famous ones is called It was like the first one discovered in East Africa. It's called the Zinj skull. It's from
Okay. Yeah, I've
Molduvai.
heard
You've
of
heard
it.
of Zinjanthropus or whatever.
Mm.
So it was a young adult.
Uh-huh.
So your wisdom teeth come when you're 18, right?
Okay.
Is your third molar erupts when you're 18.
Yeah.
So for us, it's 18, but for chimps, it's whatever, 7 years old or something like that, right?
Okay.
So this would have been somewhere in between. Let's just say it was 12 or something like that. They grew faster than we did.
Okay.
That third molar had erupted, but was not yet in the plane of the rest of the teeth, so it was not in occlusion. In other words, it wasn't wearing. It was kind of on its
Okay.
way. It was just coming in, has no
Yeah.
wear whatsoever on it. But all of the rest of the teeth are worn down to the dentin. So that
And it
means,
was only a young adult
and it was
by
a young adult.
equivalent
It hadn't even
species.
erupted its third
Wow.
molar. So that means whatever's eating was probably, well, my
Not
my
completely
estimation is that it
adapted
was
for it.
well, no, they were, but the
Yeah.
way evolution works is that it can't just create new things. All it can do is adjust what you
Yeah.
have, right? So
Yeah.
it can make thicker enamel, and
Yeah.
these did have thicker enamel. Humans are characterized by thick tooth enamel anyway, and it made them bigger, right?
Yeah.
And it worked. I mean, this group persisted for over 1 million years, so it's not like it
Yeah.
didn't work.
Yeah.
But they would wear all the way down by the time they were quite young, right? So there's no like what they call occlusal morphology. Like the dentin just wears off and you're looking at the inner part of
Yeah.
the tooth by that age. So my suspicion is that they were eating something they were pulling out of the ground like a tuber, and it was gritty. Because if you look at human
Okay.
populations now that have really heavily worn teeth, like if
Yeah.
you look at Anasazi teeth, right? So they're grinding corn in these sandstone, what they call mono and metates, right? So there's a lot
Yeah.
of silica in the corn when they eat it, and they have heavily worn teeth by the time they're old for exactly the same reasons. In other words, just
Okay.
they're
Yeah.
grinding cooked corn, and it
Yeah.
has sand in it, which is
hmm
silica.
So it's
And
constantly just
it's just
sanding their teeth down.
right, exactly. And so I think
Yeah.
that's what's happening to Afarensis.
Oh,
They're
okay. And
pulling
so
something
this
out of
is
the ground.
there's a different environment. They're having to adjust. Maybe life is not all mangoes and whatever out of the
There are no
trees
mangoes,
anymore.
right? So
So
you can imagine
there's
them
nothing.
pulling whatever tuber out of the ground all day. It's a low quality food. You have to eat
Yeah.
it, the
Because you need
way.
more. Seem to remember that with the gorillas, learning about that, which is one of the
Yes.
reasons is it's lower quality. There's less nutrients in a leaf or in these things, so you need to ingest just more pure bulk in order to get
Well,
what you
so
need. Is it similar?
that's the reason gorillas are large. So
Yeah.
chimps are pretty small. Chimps eat fruit. So chimps and bonobos can eat the fruit. And
Yeah.
the gorillas eat the fruit too. But when the seasons change, chimps move on. In other words, they're trying to
Okay.
follow the fruit, right?
Aha.
Gorillas stay and they eat low quality vegetation like tree pith. They'll actually, you've seen them strip the trees and kind of and like drag it
Oh.
through their teeth, and they're getting the
Yep.
inner part, like under the soft bark,
Okay.
right? And that's a very low quality food. In order
Mhm.
to process something like that, you have to have a huge processing chamber. So they, like gorillas, have a huge gut, and they're taking this low quality food and they're
Yeah.
breaking it down so that they can absorb the nutrients, but you have to absorb an enormous volume of that, right, in order to
Got
get
it.
enough to support. That's literally why gorillas have that huge body, right? In order to
That makes
consume
sense.
all of that, right?
Yeah.
Because a female
They need enough
gorilla,
space for it to like break down, basically.
yeah, right, you need a
Yeah.
big, chamber, right, where all that gets
Got it.
broken down by your stomach acids and absorbed in. And so female gorillas uh, are 200 pounds. I mean,
Yeah.
that's twice as big as a chimp. So in other words, the
Yeah.
basic gorilla, then you have the sexual dimorphism thing where the males compete and they get even bigger. But that's not because of the diet. The big
No.
male gorillas are
That's
competing for reproductive access, but the female gorillas have to be twice as big as chimps to process
just
the
to.
tree pith, right? And other
Yeah.
low quality foods, right? So
Okay.
Paranthropus might well have had a huge gut because it was
Okay.
consuming
Aw.
something low quality,
Big sagittal crest. So it's got
Right,
probably got
right.
so that's probably again that comes from having lots of muscles on top of its head. Probably again for the chewing piece. Like that's a muscle attachment point. The sagittal crest. Is
Correct.
that
Yeah.
right?
And also
Okay.
if you touch your cheekbone
Yeah.
and then push a little behind you and you bite down, there's a muscle that passes behind this bone right here. That's
Okay.
the muscle that attaches on there. So there's actually a hole in your skull when you look from above where this muscle passes down to the top of your jaw. So they have
Gotcha.
that, and it's a huge hole. I mean, like the muscle that would have passed through there was
Just
massive. Yeah, right.
so
So
again, this is where you're pretty sure they're just chewing all day.
yeah,
Basically what they're doing.
right. That's,
Okay.
right, right. But
And
people
maybe
argue it. People say hard food,
yeah,
tough food, whatever. I just think it's
yeah.
teeth that food that has a lot of
And
grit in
knowing
it.
the shifting environment that was taking
Right.
place, that they were probably trying to adapt to not
Yeah.
having the easier resources, which their more petite ancestors could make work for them. What about the question of scavenging? Because I think scavenging meat is, I've certainly read that that's one of the hypotheses about how like, obviously that they weren't necessarily hunting at first. They may have just been trying to get bits and pieces of other species kills. Like, do you think that that's one of the differentiators for Homo? Was that maybe
Oh,
they
for sure. Yeah. I
scavenged?
mean,
Okay,
Homo
because I don't think they were
was
hunting, probably, right? Like that far
no. I
back.
mean, there's no.
Okay.
It's not till you get Homo erectus when you have evidence of hunting, and you can
Yeah.
actually look at the types of bones that early Homo had and
Okay.
compare them to, how when a lion makes a kill in East Africa, you've seen the, like the nature videos. The lion gets it first, then the hyenas get what's
Yeah.
left, then the
Yeah.
jackals come along, and then like the marabou storks and vultures on down the line to insects, right? So there's this
Yeah.
sequence, and where you are in that sequence like determines what kind of food you're going to get because the lions eat the fattiest stuff. They're not interested in leg muscles, right? They want the viscera, which is the
Okay.
fattiest, right, stuff, and
Yeah.
also the brain, which is
The
full of
brain.
a lot of
Yeah.
fats, right? So they
Yeah.
know what's good for them to eat, and they'll eat that. But then hyenas won't get that. So hyenas will get the muscle tissue, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that the hyenas can access is bone marrow. So they have these really powerful jaws, and they can
So
crack open, and the
yeah.
obviously bone marrow is full of fat. That's why it's a delicacy, right? I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever eaten bone
Yeah.
marrow, but I grew up eating it and it's
I
delicious.
have. Yeah.
So anyway, if you look at early Homo, they are, maybe behind the hyenas, above the jackals. They would have slotted in there somewhere, but you cannot
Yeah.
imagine early Homo, which was 3 feet tall and a
No.
biped, so not very fast,
Yeah.
able to take down anything. And there's no indication that they had weapons. Homo
No.
erectus is when the shoulder reorients. So you
Ah. Okay.
acquire a throwing shoulder. So if you look at chimps have like the scapula is oriented very vertically, and they can do chin-ups all day,
Yeah.
right?
For
They
their
chin-ups,
like,
right,
yeah, they can
right,
kind
for
of
their
do that thing.
suspension.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Australopithecus had a similar shoulder
Ah.
because they
Okay.
were partly arboreal, right? So they were
Yeah.
long armed above the waist. They look apey above the waist. Below the waist, they had a bipedal, what they call hind limbs, but for
Yeah.
us,
So
just
they were
legs, right?
more
So they,
similar to how we are now.
yeah, exactly. So it would have looked odd. They would have been, I mean, Australopithecus would have looked hairy and ape-like, but then it would have walked like you or I walk,
Yeah.
just like you see someone in the grocery store walking, right? The knees together and everything.
Yeah.
Um, right. So early Homo, would have been the same size and the
Yeah.
same degree of bipedalism, and it still had long arms as far as we can tell. And so that's
So
a
not
good.
exactly apex predator
No, right.
material
It was
on a
a little
savanna
thing, and it
in
would have been
Africa.
afraid of being eaten all the time. In fact, that's why they retained that arboreal adaptation, because
Ah,
if
so
there
they could
are large
quickly.
body
Yeah.
predators around, you can scurry up a tree, right? So the way they
Okay.
model it is that hapless would have run out, grabbed some bone covered with
Yeah.
meat, run
Okay.
back
And
to the
then
base of the tree, and then they would
yeah.
have eaten it there. And if something big comes along, they would all scurry up the tree because they were adapted to climbing in trees. When you get to Homo erectus, everything changes, right? So
Yeah.
you get the large body that we have now. It has a throwing shoulder, not a suspensory shoulder. So it looks more like the scapula is more laterally oriented. It's ideal for throwing.
Yeah.
Um, and, even if you don't have a spear, if you can chuck a rock at an animal, like that,
Right.
that totally works. I mean, even a high school pitcher can throw 85 miles an hour, right? And if it's
Mm-hmm.
life or death, you will be good at that, right? And
Yeah.
a rock to the face of any animal is enough to
Yeah.
dissuade it, except the biggest, meanest,
Yeah.
So yeah, they would have, you could throw a rock, imagine throwing a rock and killing something, or a throwing stick or whatever.
And then also maybe in the intermediate as well, they may have also realized they could throw rocks at the hyenas to maybe make them go away a
Yeah,
little
that's what
bit
I mean.
faster
The
too.
big bad.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah.
deter
Like
other
you could
animals
kind
from
of
coming after you.
you could
Right.
maybe and also maybe get access to it a little bit sooner then and maybe get a little bit more
Right. Right.
meat left. And
Right.
then also it might kind of fit in because I know some of the ideas of like how Homo may have worked together, so to speak, in
Hmm.
order to kind of coordinate, because we are definitely very good at, like our genus seems to be good at that kind of social cooperation. And so it's possible because I know chimps also hunt
Well, I was going to say,
together.
I don't think
Yeah.
you have to look to Homo. I think,
Yeah.
chimps, when chimps go
Yeah.
to war, when they attack a neighboring
Yeah.
troop,
Yeah.
they do all that stuff. Some of the
Yeah.
troops
So
circle around behind and they isolate the individual, and
yeah.
they have planned the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And that would be one advantage for hominids, right? Is that if you
Yeah.
want meat, you might figure out a way
Yeah.
to get it that other animals, like if you see some animal, people can circle around behind it and you could flush it towards you, which
Yeah.
is a standard hunting technique.
Yeah. And with their
So
bigger brains, like their brains are starting to get bigger, and we know,
right.
like, so that again, their planning capacity. Well, and I think that's my question. I was thinking about chimps, and again, the fact they do hunt sometimes too. They hunt like Cultus monkeys or things like that. Do you think that like Australopithecus afarensis was doing any hunting, or are they more frugivore, more just like? Do you think there was like, is there any evidence of them doing
No,
any
there's no
hunting at
evidence
all?
of it, but I
Okay,
mean, given
maybe once in a while,
how
opportunistically.
right, there's no nothing in the fossil record, but there's no reason they wouldn't have. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
any most primates will. I mean, baboons are not hunters, but they'll certainly kill when they
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
chance. I mean, monkeys will do it because it's a high quality food. It's the preferred food
Yeah.
of primates, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except
Because I
for
mean, I think I remember reading once about that. I think, isn't our intestinal tract is only like half the length of a chimp's, I believe. And that they
yeah,
think it's
right.
because of our capacity. Obviously, it's probably more to do with even cooking food and everything, but we need that much less energy. It also means we have more energy for our brains to get bigger.
Yeah,
So there's
that's
kind of
right.
that,
Yeah, right.
that's
There's
that
a
theory,
famous
right? Yeah.
hypothesis, yeah, about that,
Yeah.
and I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. Was it, the
The
expensive tissue hypothesis, I think
Right,
it's called,
right.
right?
Leslie Aiello.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
There we
and
go.
it's
Yeah.
right.
It's an
Yeah,
interesting one. Yeah.
right. We do have a simple gut, and almost certainly we were eating meat, and that's
Okay.
evidence of early meat eating as well, right? Because
Yeah.
and I always tell my students, like Tarzan was raised
Yeah.
by the apes, and
Yeah.
literally if you raised a child with the apes, it couldn't feed the brain. Like there's not enough fruit and vegetation to support the human brain, which
No.
requires it because the tissue of the brain demands 10 times the metabolism of the rest of the body. So
Hmm.
as the brain
Yeah.
gets bigger, it has this enormous metabolic demand. And that's why most lineages don't evolve big brains because they
Yeah.
can't support them. And you can look at things like, I don't know, gorillas versus rhinos, for example, right? So, I mean, elephants versus rhinos. Sorry. If you look at an
Okay.
elephant, elephants have much, much larger brains than rhinos, even though they are
Yeah.
both big-bodied herbivores, right?
Yeah.
But because elephants are have this problem-solving, tool, the trunk, they can access a lot more food, they can solve a lot more problems. They benefit from
Oh.
the large brain. They're social.
Yep.
So I think elephants are twice as big mass-wise as a rhino, but the brain is something like 6 times as big. And that's
Yeah.
because they can both feed it and benefit from it. So like with a rhino, I mean, what's a
Bless
smart
their
rhino?
hearts, but
Well, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, like what's a smart rhino going to do, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
have any tools, right? It doesn't have a thumb or a
Yeah.
trunk. And also they're not social, so there's no benefit to it. In other words,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to remember social debts and who's a nice
Good.
rhino and who's a mean rhino because they never see each other, right? Except
Yeah.
once in a long while when it's mating season, right? You might,
Yeah.
but otherwise they're just sitting there chewing, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Minding their own business.
the
Yeah.
brain evolution is a very specific thing. It occurs
Yeah.
A, when the animal can benefit from it, and B, when it can support it. And brains have gotten smaller, so almost assuredly the Flores Homo floresiensis brain
Hmm.
ancestrally was larger because we have
Ah, okay.
no, I mean, assuming it evolved from Homo erectus or something like it, or maybe like the Georgian fossils, the Georgian variant of Homo erectus, which is a small
Yeah, like
brained,
the early one kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So even if it evolved from an 800 cc brain, it's
Yeah.
down in the 300s, right? It is a
Yeah.
tiny, tiny brain. And what probably happened is that it was on an island, and island causes unusual selective forces, and it
Yeah.
literally pushed it back down to live like an Australopithecus. Like in other words, it has
Oh,
long
wow.
arms, um, and big feet, and you know, um, That's one potential hypothesis anyway. But certainly the brain getting smaller cries out for explanation because in our sort of model of what it is to be a human, having a big
Yeah.
brain is always a benefit. And we have this like steady progress. You see the t-shirts and the mugs where it's like you start chimpy
Yeah.
and then you get bigger and bigger, and right.
Yeah.
And that's not the way evolution works, right? Evolution tailors
Hmm.
adaptations to specific environments. So Paranthropus, for example, did not evolve a big brain because it wasn't going to benefit it as much as it would Homo, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, like it's picking up something from the ground that's probably fairly easy to find, and it just has to do that all day. It doesn't have to solve the same kind of problems that Homo does, which is dealing with large-bodied predators to try to steal prey, right?
Yeah.
And it can support that brain. So Floresiensis with that tiny little brain, I mean, this is kind of my favorite hypothesis for it, is that not it didn't it came from something like Homo erectus, and selection said, great, you're on this island, but there are some unusual selective forces here. There are Komodo dragons on the ground. You don't want to be on the ground. You got to get
Hmm.
back up in the trees. There is not enough vegetation to support a Homo erectus-sized brain, so we're going to tamp your brain down a little bit, make it smaller. Australopithecus was able to survive in those kinds of circumstances. It looks very much like Australopithecus. I mean, if you take the brain
Yeah.
size and the limbs and all those things. So yeah, and there are other primate lineages and other lineages where brains have gotten smaller because they just become too
Hmm.
expensive to support metabolically, right? So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
evolution says better survive with a small brain than not survive
Yeah.
at all. So
And to
we're
be
gonna
really hungry but have a big brain. That's
Yeah,
not going to help
right. I mean,
anybody.
it's extremely expensive. So like the human
Yeah.
metabolic demand is I don't know. Leslie says it's basically a quarter of our metabolic demand goes to
Yeah.
our brain, whereas
Goes
with
to our
chimps it's
brain.
like 7%, right?
Yeah.
So that's why you might want to have a smaller brain because you can't afford to feed it.
Yeah. And it may even be too that as we saw that environment change and the things happen that the speciation took place, it almost seems like maybe different sort of branches of what was originally Afarensis and then sort of splitting off. Maybe they sort of took up different niches in the environment or were in slightly different conditions, and then that selected for whatever
Well,
the options were in
it
those
would. I
areas,
mean,
right? Yeah.
Homo, you would benefit from a larger brain.
Yeah.
Like predators always have larger brains because if you are prey, you have to basically know two things: where the food is you're trying to eat and where the predator is trying to chase you. But if you're a
You can run.
predator, you have to try
Yeah.
to think the way the prey is thinking so you can be where the prey is. It almost requires theory of mind.
I was
Like
just
you
going to
have
say
to
that's a bit theory of mindish, isn't it? Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is, and that's
Yeah.
why like I mean, all predators have larger brains than their prey. That's just a
Yeah.
universal. And that's why we, as pets, you have predators because they're smart
Yes, that's
enough and they're
true.
social, so you can, sort of live with them.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I
you
had a
grew up with,
guinea pig growing up, and it was really sweet, but
but
you
right,
know,
it's not responding to you really in the same way that a dog
no,
is, right? And
no,
so that intelligence
no.
comes from being a predator,
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah.
right?
Well, that's a really interesting sort of pullback thought. Last question. So you have all these teeth. We're starting to be able to occasionally actually sequence protein out of some of these old teeth. I mean,
It's
I
called
believe there was the
proteomics. Yeah. So it's
yeah, okay,
they can extract it. It's not, I mean, you're extracting the protein. So
yeah,
just to give you like the primer on genetics, the product of your genetics is the protein. So you're composed of proteins that have been
okay,
produced by a series of genes, right? And if you look at like Neanderthals, they can take those bones. There's still actual DNA in those bones that they can extract, right? And they can
yeah.
push that back to about 400,000 years.
Yeah, I think
But
Sima de la Suecis was the oldest, I think,
right,
at
yeah,
about
that's the
430, right?
400,000. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
400,000 year ones, right? So they can
yeah,
get actual DNA. They can get the nucleotides.
yeah.
But the proteomics is they can extract some of the proteins from the teeth that are the products of the DNA, not the DNA itself. But you can theoretically sort of work backwards, right? Because we kind of
Okay.
know the series of amino acids that make the protein and so forth. So they have done that. Now this is like a future tech for us because
Yeah,
to my knowledge, there's only one early hominin study, and they were only able to determine the sex of the
yeah,
teeth. But
yeah. That was it. Was it a bull? Yeah, I feel like it was Boise that I think it was
No, it
planted.
was Africanus down in South
Okay.
Africa. Yeah. And so
Okay.
they could
Okay.
extract the proteins, but all you're getting is like the level of X versus Y. So the problem is that it's destructive. So you don't
Yes.
like, I would say we're going to wait until we're sure that we could get what we want and not do too much damage to the teeth. And then, yeah, sure, of
Yeah.
course. But you don't want to
Yeah.
grind up a whole tooth when you only have 9 of
Um,
this
oh
species, right?
goodness. Oh, and at this point, it's still fairly new tech, so it needs more of it. Is
It
that
needs
the
more of the
so?
material. It doesn't have to grind a whole
I
tooth,
know
but
with
you
some
do
of
have
it, they can just grind, they can just like take a tiny, with the more recent stuff, they can sometimes just drill a tiny hole
yeah,
and just
right,
take,
right. Because
but
the
that's
preservation
obviously it's
is,
pressure and it's
yeah,
not so
right.
converted and so degraded. So,
Yeah, it's been
but yeah,
sitting
because I
in
mean,
like
that
this has
would be
been sitting in
huge.
silica soaked water for millions of
Yeah.
years, right? And
Yeah.
percolating
Yeah.
back and forth
Yeah.
and all this kind of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And it's the same with DNA. They used to need a lot of material to do
Yeah.
early DNA,
Yeah.
and now they need very little. So, I mean, they do also other types of like isotopic studies on the teeth, and so,
Ah,
and
okay.
now they
Yeah.
need, and that's still destructive, but it's less so. And we have them take us out of the tooth. It's not anatomically interesting or whatever, and
Yeah.
morphologically informative. So, I mean, we all work around it, and we very much want that to be done.
Oh my gosh,
I mean,
that
I
because
am
that would
very
really
keen.
help. That would be really interesting. It might help
Right.
rebuild
Right.
some of those relationships a
No,
little
no,
bit
no. If
more
you
to
could, if
understand.
you could recreate phylogeny from it, the evolutionary relationships among all
Yeah.
those, then that would be like answer so many questions, right? Because
Is
once you
that
have
like
phylogeny,
that's your hopes and dreams? If you could have anything, that would be the thing you would like to see
well,
in
I
the
mean,
future.
certainly it's one. I mean, it would allow us to map the
Yeah.
anatomical change onto the branching diagram, right? Because you're trying to figure out
Yeah.
why, like, science is always about why, right? Why
Yep.
things happened ultimately, right? I mean, you first you say what happened, and then you say why did it happen? Like you push deeper. So that would help us know why because you would already have the what. You would know what
Yeah.
happened, and then you would be able to say, okay, so now we have this branch. Let's take some of the environmental information and try to figure out what was going on to drive this change. Because animals normally don't change unless they have to. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
coelacanths have been around for
necessity's
450.
yeah, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So something
Right.
happens and then some change.
Yeah.
Or it could even
Right.
be something, the way I was trying to describe it to my son was it can even be something that's a very neutral trait until circumstances change and suddenly this one variation of a trait becomes the advantageous one and suddenly becomes useful in a way
Sure.
that
Although
maybe
we are nowhere near to that level of resolution in
no.
our early hominid. I mean,
You're
that
like we
is.
just would like some high level stuff. That would
Yeah,
be
I
cool.
mean, that
Yeah.
it's true. You can say that about, especially like extant animals, right? Because you
Yeah.
can get
Yeah.
at some of the genetics, like you can determine whether some part of anatomy is the product of selection or not by looking at things like variation and covariation in the anatomy.
Yeah.
We are nowhere near that
No.
with hominids, believe me, just because they require big sample sizes. Even
Yeah.
aside from knowing the genetics of it, if you have big sample sizes, you can see subtle covariant shifts, in populations, but we don't have anywhere near
No, no.
that kind of
That's
stuff.
like down the that's a couple phases away. I
Right.
mean,
But
yeah, yeah,
the
that's
assumption
fun.
is that things don't change unless they have to. And like I said, like the coelacanth hasn't changed in 450 million years. Like it has
It's
found a
crazy.
niche, right, that
Yeah.
works. And so it just sits in the Indian Ocean eating and making little baby coelacanths, right?
I love it.
So, right, that's all it has to do. And that works for it,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Oh,
But,
that's amazing. Yeah. So I mean, it's like this whole mystery that you're trying to rebuild based on some teeth. It's really fun.
yeah, it is. I mean, and that's part of the fun of it, right? It's a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So working through a puzzle, it's like an intellectual, it teases at you, like,
Yeah.
can you figure this out, right?
Yep. I love
So
it.
yeah, no, it is. I find it gratifying to try to work on that, and a lot of my other work is trying to find tools that can be used to sift this stuff out, right? So
Yeah. To better understand.
yeah, so you look at the patterns of covariation in chimps and gorillas and bonobos and orangutans to try to get a sense of how the ape face responds to selective pressure. You can do things like that under the assumption
Ah. Yeah.
that because we are apes, our faces are responding would
Mhm.
respond similarly to selective pressure in various parts. Like what parts are genetically independent, which parts are linked, which parts can, be part of an adaptation, but which parts are being held back. All that kind of stuff you can do if you have large samples and can look at all the
Yes.
covariation in the anatomy and all that sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
So kind of like a bit of a loose sort of analog that you can kind of look and see what's happening over there. And then again, with caution, be like, well, it's possible that if similar pressures or similar things happened here, we would expect similar results.
Right. So like one paper I worked on with a friend of mine, so she's a developmental geneticist. So if you look at like under the nose, like this bone right here, we call it the premaxilla, but it's connected to the rest. So it doesn't look like it's a separate bone. On all apes, it is an actual separate bone with sutures and everything. And so our hypothesis was that we lost the suture, but that bone is still free to evolve independently on its own. And so we looked at the anatomical variation of all the great apes and humans to try to figure out if humans have a different pattern of covariation than the apes, and we don't. So we have lost the suture, but that's still actually an independent bone. And you see it in infants. So it fuses a little bit later in life, but it's still free to evolve, right? Because it's under independent genetic control. So that's the kind of thing that you try to do to get at like why, because this part of the face is pretty critical in human evolution. Like we start with a big apey face that protrudes out,
like the muzzly kind of more muzzle
and
style.
Then it retracts in, and then in Paranthropus especially, it retracts behind the cheekbones. It's actually concave in Paranthropus,
isn't it?
And so that's like really unusual. So that's the kind of thing you would get at, by using these methods and then saying the assumption is if all apes and humans respond the same way, then Paranthropus would have done the same. And so you can say something about the evolution of that part of the face. So if that makes sense, like,
that makes perfect sense. No, I mean, this is rebuilding the mystery. Little, what's what I always say is that like the paleoanthropology and even more into your paleontology part of this, the human story, is that, we don't have pyramids or like written records. Like it truly is. I feel like even with the time period I'm talking about, and it's much more recent, and we have many more examples of things. It feels like I'm peeking through like a keyhole in a door and trying to rebuild the room.
Right.
And I mean, you're even more so. Like you're down to like just a tiny little, like really.
I mean, right.
It's so fun. It's wonderful.
No, it is. And I have this. One of the things that I sort of axes that I grind is that humans are apes and apes are animals, and so humans are doing the same things that animals do. And like when we think about humans, people like to think of us and our lineage as something unique and special that is not like other animals, but that's not the case, right? We respond to natural selection in the same way that every other animal responds to natural selection. So we should be modeling ourselves as apes, and primates and mammals and so forth, and not treating ourselves as some unique thing. But people can't help it because that, there's this sort of vanity that humans have that we are special, like we are the unique thing, right? We are the only ones to make the Sistine Chapel or whatever, right? And so we look for these examples of uniqueness, but every animal is unique in its own niche, right? And in general, humans anatomically and behaviorally respond the way primates do to situations, right? And so, that's one of the things I sort of push on is that, and that's why we don't think of humans having a single lineage that went from, chimp-like to us. We branched out the same way other, groups did. Like we have this incredible diversity. Now, right now, we're the only human left alive, but that's very, very recent, 25,000 years, right? Before that, you had 4, 5, 6, 7 species of human, all in independent niches on the earth. Now, one thing modern humans are good at is making other animals extinct. So, there are all the other humans.
Not one of our best qualities.
No, right. But that's a fairly recent thing, and so I try to push us away from the vanity of thinking that we are unique because we're really not like. And this goes for behavior too. I mean, humans behave very much the way chimps do. Like our war-like behavior, our aggression, our jealousy, all those things are, you just look at that, that's the way primates behave.
Well, I mean, I'm team Neanderthal when it comes to them having made art. So, I mean, I think that's where, again, I see much more similarity with us and our relatives and with our greater family
and
as
even
well,
chimps,
rather than seeing them.
I mean, you can give an elephant a paintbrush and it will, I mean, there are elephant paintings that they sell in New York City
Yeah,
for, $50,000, right? Because
yeah,
once you have a uh, large brains are going to share a lot of similarities, right?
yeah, yeah. There's almost
And
like an infrastructure of intelligence is kind of how I've been thinking about it. So, because I'm
so
actually working, yeah, with stuff that's kind of falling into that category.
yeah, I mean, for me, I tend to take the emergent
Yeah.
complexity model. So once you have enough neurons in your system,
Mhm.
you will something like consciousness will emerge. And once you have
Ooh,
consciousness,
yeah,
and because it's just like if you look at a murmuration of starlings, when starlings fly, they make these really amazing patterns. There's
yeah,
no genetic instruction telling them to do that. They're all just following really simple rules about keeping a distance from each other and trying to find open, but it makes this really amazing pattern, right?
yeah,
And ants also like that's kind of where this sort of comes from is like you watch ants and they can make and social insects make these really amazing structures and do these amazing bridge building behaviors, all this kind of stuff. But any given ant has got like seven pieces of information in its head at any given time, and all it's doing is responding in really simple ways. But what emerges out is something really complex, like something that we recognize as being more than just the sum of the parts.
yeah,
And I think human intelligence and all animal like consciousness is this way, right? And they do all these studies on corvids, which are like the birds, the
yes.
bird
Oh,
lineage that's particularly
yes.
smart. Um, Obviously, whales and dolphins have it, elephants have it.
Yeah,
So there are a bunch of animals that once selection selects for enough neurons, this
yeah,
thing just comes out totally independently, right? And so, our behavior, like we think people say language, I mean, it's possible entirely that dolphins are using a grammar that we're just not aware of, right? Because they are extremely sophisticated in their social
yeah,
behaviors, unpleasantly
yeah,
sophisticated in a
yeah.
lot of their social
At
behaviors.
times, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, I
the
mean,
ones that make me nervous are actually the octopus. It's a good thing they're not social. That's the one thing they're missing. If they
yeah,
were more social, I think we'd be in trouble.
they are, in my mind, they are like the perfect model for what we should expect in alien intelligence. Because
Me too. I always think
octopuses,
that as well. Yeah,
the neurons tend to be in the limbs, there's no central switching station that is the node of all things. A lot of
yeah,
decisions are made independently in the tentacles or whatever you call them.
yes,
So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, like, yeah, nature does it all different ways, but selection, because it has these problem-solving tools, selection said you can benefit from having a lot of neurons. And so it gave it a lot of neurons, right? And they are
yeah.
very sophisticated in their behaviors.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
No,
no,
they're
right. And so
fascinating.
that's one of the axes I tend to grind is like we need to
I
be
love it.
applying science and evolutionary biology to, just to treat us as another
Yeah,
example of nature,
yeah.
and
One of the other iterations of, again,
right,
lots of
right.
neurons,
Yeah,
bigger brains.
you tend to be
Yeah,
working against a lot of cultural biases, some that come
yeah,
from religion or elsewhere,
yeah.
that try to make us
Well,
as unique and special.
yeah. I
And
mean, our entire field's based on that, right?
Yeah, that's
Really.
right. That's right. So I don't actually, even though I'm in an anthropology department, I
Yeah,
lock horns with cultural anthropologists about this in my department because they focus on the few unique things, right, about
yeah.
us, and they tend to lean on those. And I'm like, yeah, I'm really an evolutionary biologist. It's just that the
Okay.
thing I specialize in is humans. That's how I think of
Yeah.
myself.
Okay.
I'm a
That
paleontologist of humans.
that's your approach is coming from
Right.
that angle.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love it.
And
Yeah.
so our listeners don't get a little too overwhelmed with the length of this episode. I think
Yeah.
that is a
Sure.
great
We
place
should
for us
stop
to
now.
call it.
All
We're a
That
right.
was
little
awesome.
over time. That was a great episode. Thank you very much, Dr. Villmoare, for coming on and talking to us
Yes.
about this amazing new discovery, well, potentially two new species of hominin that you are discussing in Ledi-Geraru. It was an absolutely wonderful discussion. And I am so looking forward to the future fossils you apparently already
Mhm.
have that you are
We
studying
do.
and writing the papers on. So
Right.
that's so exciting and great to hear. Always looking forward to new news in the world of paleoanthropology. And so if in the future you'd love to come on again and discuss the new fossils, we'd love to
Sure.
have you. For now, we're going to end it here. Again,
Okay. Very
Genevieve,
good.
Dr. Villmoare, thank you both
Thank
so much for
you. It
coming
was a
on.
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my pleasure as well.